On the day my life was supposed to begin, my family ended it. Standing there in my wedding dress, a cloud of white tulle and shattered dreams, they didn't just disown me. They orchestrated a betrayal so complete, so devastating, that it was designed to leave me with absolutely nothing. In front of every Persian I'd ever known, they took my inheritance, they took my dignity, and they tried to take my future. But in the wreckage they created, I found a key to a forgotten safe deposit box. They thought they had buried me, but they didn't realize they had just handed me the shovel. It's almost funny to look back now, to see how blissfully, stupidly unaware I was. The year leading up to the wedding was a whirlwind of what I thought was pure happiness. I had Liam, the love of my life, a man whose quiet strength was the perfect anchor to my more chaotic energy. His smile was the first thing I wanted to see in the morning and the last thing at night. We weren't just planning a wedding, we were building a life. We spend hours looking at houses we couldn't afford yet, laughing as we debated ridiculous things like whether a dog would prefer a huge yard or a house with more napping spots. With him, everything just felt easy. And then there was my family. From the outside, you'd think we were the picture of success. My father, who passed away 5 years ago, had built a massive property empire from nothing. He was a force of nature, a man whose booming laugh could fill any room and whose quiet disapproval could crush you. I was, and always will be, a daddy's girl. He was the one who taught me to see the world not just for what it was, but for what it could be. His passing left a hole that my mother, Eleanor, and my older brother, Julian, tried to fill in their own ways. Eleanor slipped into the role of the grieving, elegant matriarch with a practiced, almost professional ease. She was all about appearances, about maintaining the pristine facade of the Harrington family name. Our conversations were rarely about how I felt, and more about how things looked. "Clara, darling, that color doesn't project confidence," she'd say, or "remember to stand tall at the gala. The Jennings are watching." Her love felt conditional, tied to my performance as the perfect daughter. Julian, on the other hand, was the heir apparent. He'd always lived in our father's shadow, and since his death, he'd been desperate to prove he could not only fill his shoes but buy a bigger, more expensive pair. He was sharp, ambitious, and had a charm that could feel warm one moment and chillingly slick the next. He ran the family business now, and every family dinner was peppered with his talk of acquisitions, market fluctuations, and his grand vision for the Harrington legacy. He and I were never really close. He had this competitive streak I never understood. To him, every relationship was a transaction, every conversation a negotiation. The inheritance was the silent guest at every family meal. My father's will was clear, or so I thought. He'd stipulated that Julian would get control of the company, since he'd been groomed for it, but the lion's share of the liquid assets and a significant trust fund were to be split. A portion would be released to me on my 25th birthday, and the rest when I got married. The wedding wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a major financial event. Looking back, the warning signs were all there, like tiny cracks in a beautiful vase. The hushed conversations between my mother and brother that would just stop the second I walked into a room. The way Julian would look at Liam, a dismissive sneer he barely tried to hide, as if Liam were just some opportunistic gold digger. "Are you sure about him, Clara?" he asked me one night, swirling a glass of scotch. "He's a teacher. A noble profession, I suppose, but hardly ambitious." "You have to protect your assets." I defended Liam fiercely, insulted by what he was implying. My mother's warnings were more subtle, wrapped in a fake blanket of concern. "Darling, marriage is a serious legal commitment. You must be practical. Your father would have wanted you to be smart about this." They pushed for a prenup, one that was so laughably one-sided that even calm, collected Liam had to raise an eyebrow. He agreed to sign it without a fight, telling me, "I'm marrying you, Clara, not your bank account. If this makes them feel better, it's just a piece of paper." His grace should have shamed them, but all it did was fuel that strange, cold fire I saw in their eyes. I dismissed it all. I told myself it was just misplaced grief and overprotectiveness. They were just looking out for me, worried about the legacy Dad had built. I chose to see their actions through a lens of love because the alternative was just too painful to even think about. I floated through my bridal showers and dress fittings on a cloud of denial, focusing only on the perfect future that was waiting for me. The wedding itself was planned to perfection, a sprawling affair at the most exclusive country club, with flowers flown in from Holland and a guest list that was a who's who of the city's elite. It was everything my mother had ever dreamed of for me, or so I thought. The truth was, she was just setting the stage for my public execution. The day started like something out of a movie. Sun poured through the windows of the bridal suite, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. My dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, hanging like a promise against the wardrobe. My bridesmaids were a flurry of champagne and happy chatter. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't expected. I was marrying Liam. That one simple, beautiful fact was the only thing that mattered. The ceremony was a blur of happy tears and promises. When Liam looked at me, his eyes shining with so much love, I felt like the luckiest person on the entire planet. We exchanged rings, we were pronounced husband and wife, and we walked back down the aisle under a shower of white rose petals, holding hands so tightly I thought our bones might fuse. It was perfect. Utterly, breathtakingly perfect. The reception was where the dream shattered. We had just finished our first dance. The guests were settling in for dinner when my mother, Alina, stood up, tapping her glass for a toast. She looked stunning in a silver gown, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. I smiled back, expecting the usual stuff, a few embarrassing childhood stories, some well wishes for our future. "I'd like to welcome you all," she began, her voice ringing with a false warmth that sent a tiny shiver down my spine. "We are here today to celebrate a union, but also to mark a transition. Families are complex things. They have legacies to protect." She paused, her eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. The smile never left her face, but her eyes changed. They became cold, predatory. "My late husband, a brilliant man, built an empire. He built it on strength, loyalty, and on making smart, unsentimental decisions. He understood that sometimes, for the good of the whole, you have to cut away the parts that are weak, the parts that threaten the entire structure." A confused murmur went through the room. I glanced at Liam, my own smile feeling stiff and painted on. He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, but his brow was furrowed. Julian stood up next to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He looked right at me, his expression a mask of sober, calculated pity. It was the look of an executioner apologizing for the axe. "My sister, Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "has always been led by her heart, not her head. A romantic trait, but a dangerous one. Our father knew this. In his final years, he grew concerned. He saw that Clara's impulsive nature could put everything he worked for at risk. This was wrong, all of it. My dad never called me impulsive, not like that. He called me passionate. He said my heart was my greatest strength. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My dress suddenly felt way too tight, too heavy." Alina spoke again, her voice now sharp and cruel. "That is why my husband, in his wisdom, made a final, difficult decision. He amended his will. He saw that Clara's choice in a partner," she flicked a dismissive glance at Liam, "was proof of her poor judgment. He couldn't, in good conscience, leave a significant portion of his legacy in such incapable hands." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This couldn't be happening. Julian held up a sheaf of papers. "My father's final will and testament," he announced, "signed and witnessed a month before he passed. It names me, Julian Harrington, as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the entire Harrington estate. As for Clara," he paused, savoring the moment. "He left her a token sum, a gesture of residual affection, but his instructions to us were clear. The family fortune must be protected from her." Tears were blurring my vision. I looked from my brother's smug face to my mother's icy mask. This was a lie. It had to be. My father would never, ever do that to me. But then it got worse. Alina raised her glass. "And so, with a heavy heart but a clear conscience, we must honor his final wishes. We can't stand by and watch his life's work be jeopardized. Therefore, we are not just announcing a change in inheritance. We are announcing a necessary separation. Clara, by choosing this path, by ignoring our counsel, you have separated yourself from this family. You are no longer a Harrington." She actually said it. She disowned me, on my wedding day, in front of 200 people. The shock was a physical blow. It knocked the air right out of my lungs. I felt Liam's arm tighten around me, his whole body tense with rage. I heard gasps, saw faces etched with horror and morbid curiosity. My world had been turned upside down in 3 minutes. My family, my inheritance, my identity, all stripped away from me under the glittering chandeliers. I looked at my mother, searching for a flicker of something, regret, sorrow, anything. There was nothing, just the cold finality of a business deal. They hadn't just disowned me. They had planned this. They chose my happiest day to inflict the deepest wound possible, to humiliate me so completely that I would break. They smiled, raised their glasses, and in that moment I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was just collateral damage. The aftermath was just chaos. A silent, screaming kind of chaos. The reception dissolved into a hushed, awkward exodus of guests who couldn't look me in the eye. They whispered to each other as they fled, their faces a mix of pity and embarrassment. They were fleeing the scene of an accident. My accident. Liam, my husband of just a few hours, was my rock. He shielded me, his fury a protective wall around my crumbling composure, and got me out of there. The drive back to our apartment was silent. I sat in my ridiculous wedding dress, now stained with tears and the ashes of my old life. I was numb. The pain was too huge to even process. It was just a gaping black hole where my heart used to be. The first few weeks were a gray blur. I barely ate, I didn't sleep. I just existed in a fog of devastation. Liam was incredible. He held me when I sobbed, made me tea I didn't drink, and talked to me when I couldn't find any words. He handled everything, the vendors, the legal notices from my family's lawyers that formalized my disinheritance, and the pathetic token sum. It was enough to cover a few months, rent, a final, insulting slap in the face. My mother and brother never called. It was like I'd just vanished. I was an inconvenient chapter they'd neatly ripped out of the family history. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, it was the sheer, calculated cruelty. They had waited for the moment I was at my most joyful, and they had savaged me. They wanted to break me, and for a while I thought they had. Then, about a month after the wedding, during one long, sleepless night, something shifted. I was rummaging through an old box of my dad's things, desperate for something, anything that felt real. A photo, a letter, a connection to the man I knew, not the monster they'd described. At the bottom of the box, tucked inside his old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, was a small, old-fashioned key. Taped to it was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was his handwriting. The note was short. My heart pounded as I read. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Don't believe what they say. Don't let them break you. Your heart is your strength. Never forget that. This key is for you and you alone. Box 317. First National Bank, downtown. Be smart, be strong. All my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair, they were tears of a desperate, flickering hope. A key, a safe deposit box, a message from my father. He had known. He had suspected they would do something like this. He had prepared. He had left me something. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, I woke up with a purpose. Liam saw the change in me instantly. I showed him the key and the note, and his eyes, which had been so full of worry, lit up with a fierce fire. "Whatever it is," he said, his voice firm, "we face it together." Walking into that bank felt surreal. The air was cool and silent, smelling of old money. I clutched the key, its cold metal a link to my father's love. A stern-faced bank employee led me deep into the vault, retrieved a long metal box, and left me alone with it in a private room. My fingers shook as I unlocked it. It wasn't full of cash or jewels. There were only a few items inside, but I quickly realized my father hadn't left me a life raft. He had left me an arsenal. First, a thick envelope. Inside was a legal document. The last will and testament of Richard Harrington. I scanned it. It was dated a week before his death and was completely different from the one Julian brandished at my wedding. In this will, my father left Julian control of the company, but with strict oversight clauses. The rest, the properties, the stocks, the trust fund, nearly 70% of the family's liquid wealth, was left to me, his beloved daughter, Clara, whose compassion and integrity are her greatest assets. Behind the will was a smaller envelope with several photographs. They were of my mother, Elinor, with a man I didn't recognize. They were intimate, damning. There were also copies of hotel receipts and travel itineraries going back over 20 years. My father had known his wife was having an affair. The last item made my blood run cold. It was a sealed letter addressed to me and a certified copy of a DNA test. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the letter. "Clara," it began, "I am so sorry you have to learn these truths this way. I have known for a long time about your mother's infidelity, but I could not bear the thought of her and Julian using their deceit to harm you. The man in the photos is Julian's biological father. Julian is not my son. He has no Harrington blood. This is the secret they have guarded, the lie their entire lives are built on. They will try to take what is yours. They will say I turned on you. It is a lie. This box contains the truth. Use it, not for vengeance, but for justice. Reclaim what is yours. Build the life you deserve. Know that I have always and will always love you." I just sat there in the cold, silent vault room, the papers spread out before me. The shock was slowly replaced by a rising tide of pure, cold rage. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. Their whole lives were a fraud. My brother wasn't my brother. My mother's grief was a performance. Their betrayal wasn't just greed. It was desperation to protect a lie that was their entire existence. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. My father had left me the truth, and the truth was a weapon. The fog of grief lifted, replaced by a crystalline clarity. They had wanted a war. Now they were going to get one. My plan wasn't some flash of inspiration. It was forged in the quiet, methodical weeks that followed. The fury I felt in that bank vault cooled and hardened into something sharp and precise. Vengeance is messy. I wanted justice. I wanted to dismantle their world. Liam was my strategist, my silent partner. The first step was finding the right lawyer. My father's letter had mentioned an old friend, Samuel Bennett, a semi-retired corporate litigator known for being more shark than man. I found him living in a quiet house upstate, surrounded by books on military history. I laid it all out on his mahogany desk, the 2 wills, the photos, the DNA test, the letter. He read everything in silence. When he finally looked up, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Your father was a good man," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And your mother and that boy are fools. They've built their house on a foundation of sand, and you, my dear, are the coming tide. This isn't just a probate case. This is a demolition." Samuel's strategy was brilliantly cruel. We wouldn't just attack them head-on. We dismantle their world piece by piece. Phase 1, the legal trap. Samuel filed a petition to challenge the will. As expected, their lawyers responded with mockery. In sworn affidavits, my mother and Julian committed perjury with spectacular arrogance. They swore my father was disappointed in me, that he was lucid when he signed their fake will. They walked right into it. We didn't show our hand. We held back our best cards and let them get comfortable in their lies. Phase 2, the social assassination. This was my domain. Eleanor thrived on her reputation as a philanthropic socialite. Her power was her image. So I started to tarnish it, not with a shout, but with a whisper. An anonymous tip to the city's most voracious gossip columnist about a prominent society widow with a long-held secret. Then I had quiet lunches with old family friends. I played the part of the heartbroken daughter perfectly. I never accused my mother of anything. I just asked questions. "I just don't understand," I'd say, my voice trembling. "Dad was so happy for me and Liam. His last letters were so full of love. Did he ever seem different to you in those last months?" The seeds of doubt were planted. The tide of social opinion began to turn. Phase 3, the financial squeeze. Julian saw himself as a titan of industry, but his position was built on a lie. Samuel began discreetly making inquiries with key investors, letting slip vague concerns about potential leadership succession issues. A major line of credit Julian was counting on was suddenly put under review. His house of cards was starting to sway in the wind. The final act was the preliminary probate hearing. My mother and Julian arrived looking smug, like this was just a minor annoyance. I sat across from them with Liam and Samuel, feeling unnervingly calm in a simple blue dress. Their lawyer called my claim baseless. When he finished, the judge looked at Samuel. "Mr. Bennett, anything to add?" Samuel smiled. Just a few items, Your Honor." He stood up and calmly placed a certified copy of my father's real will on the table. "First, we have this. The actual last will of Richard Harrington, which we will prove was supplanted by a fraudulent document." Julian actually laughed, a short, ugly bark. "That's a forgery." "Is it?" Samuel asked softly, before placing the photos of our mother and her lover on the table. "Perhaps you'd recognize this gentleman, Julian." Eleanor's face went white. The color drained from her cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. "And finally," Samuel said, his voice dropping, "we have the matter of lineage. The Harrington legacy is built on blood, isn't it?" He slid the certified DNA results across the table. They stopped right in front of Julian. "These results prove conclusively that Julian Harrington shares no paternal DNA with the late Richard Harrington. He is not, in fact, a Harrington at all." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Julian stared at the paper, his face a mask of disbelief that slowly twisted into panicked horror. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening understanding. He wasn't the heir. He was the product of an affair. His entire identity was a sham. My mother started babbling. "Lies, all lies, she's just vindictive." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt nothing. Just a vast, empty distance. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. "You didn't just disown me," I said. "You tried to erase me. You used my wedding to perform your lies, and you defiled my father's memory. You did all of this to protect a secret, to protect him." I nodded towards Julian. "And now the truth is out. You have nothing left to protect." Julian finally broke. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping violently. He looked at my mother with pure hatred. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice choked with venom. "My entire life you lied." He turned and stormed out of the room, a broken man. My mother just sat there, shrunken and old. The elegant matriarch was gone, replaced by a small, frightened woman who had lost everything. The judge cleared his throat. "I believe," he said to her lawyers, "that we have a great deal to discuss." I stood up, took Liam's hand, and we walked out, leaving the ruins of their lives behind us. The war was over. Victory wasn't a parade. It was the quiet, deep breath you take after holding it for way too long. The legal fallout was swift and devastating for them. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and perjury, Eleanor and Julian settled. The fraudulent will was thrown out, my father's true will was executed, and the Harrington fortune was now mine. The social fallout was even more brutal. The story leaked, the secret affair, the illegitimate son, the disinherited daughter who rose from the ashes with the truth. My mother became a pariah. The friends who once flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Julian vanished. I heard he moved overseas, trying to start over under a different name, completely cut off from the woman who built his life on a lie. I, on the other hand, became some kind of reluctant folk hero. But I didn't want the attention. I just wanted peace. Liam and I bought a house in the countryside with a big yard, just like we'd always talked about. We got a golden retriever who loves all the hiding spots for his naps. The inheritance isn't a weapon anymore. It's a tool. I established a charitable foundation in my father's name, supporting educational opportunities for underprivileged kids. A legacy he would have been proud of, one built on compassion, not greed. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think about them. I don't feel hatred anymore. Mostly, I just feel a deep sadness for the family I thought I had, for a love that was never real. The revenge was necessary, it was justice, but it came at a cost. It cemented the fact that I was, in a way, an orphan. But then I look at Liam, at the home we've created, filled with laughter and warmth and honesty. Their betrayal, as awful as it was, led me here. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. It burned away all the lies and showed me what was real. They taught me what betrayal felt like. In turn, I taught them that actions have consequences. In the quiet of my new life, I've learned that the best things aren't what you inherit, but what you build yourself from the rubble. Have you ever had to make the impossible choice to cut ties with family to protect your own peace? It's one of the hardest things anyone can go through. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to feel less alone. And if you enjoy stories about justice and seeing strength win out over betrayal, make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.